I'm only 18. I don't have a mom. I don't have a dad. I don't have any family. It's just me and my baby. That's my only blood relative I have.
It was supposed to be just another calm summer night in Roseville, Michigan. A young mother finishing a shift, a familiar babysitter watching over her little boy. But on June 13th, 2022, that quiet evening would unravel into a nightmare that left an entire community reeling, and a mother without her child. 21-year-old Kimora Hodges had been trusted to care for 23-month-old Kyrie Starks. More than once before, she lived in the same apartment complex as Taylor Starks, Kyrie's mother. The two women weren't close friends, but they were neighbors who looked out for one another. Taylor worked late nights and often relied on Kimora for help. She paid her, checked in often, and believed her child was in good hands. But beneath that calm, trustworthy exterior was a young woman spiraling under the pressure of her own frustration and resentment. Around 2 a.m., Taylor's phone buzzed. A message from Hodges. Kyrie wasn't breathing right. Taylor raced home, terrified, hoping she could still fix whatever had gone wrong. When she burst through the door, the sight was unbearable. Her baby on the floor, convulsing, gasping. Emergency crews rushed Kyrie to Ascension St. John Hospital in Detroit. Hodges told everyone the same story. Kyrie had eaten soap and was having an allergic reaction. But doctors immediately recognized trauma, not ingestion. X-rays and scans revealed bleeding in the brain and swelling consistent with violent impact. The injuries were impossible to reconcile with her story. Roseville detectives were called in. As they questioned Hodges, her story kept changing. She said Kyrie fell. Then she said she'd accidentally dropped him. Finally, under pressure, she admitted she had lost control. In a recorded statement later played in court, Hodges said she'd been frustrated because Kyrie wouldn't stop crying. She admitted that she may have hit him too hard. Those words would come to define the case. Doctors fought for days to keep Kyrie alive, but the damage was catastrophic. On June 22nd, 2022, 9 days after the attack, he was pronounced dead. He was just under 2 years old. Investigators pieced together the sequence of events. Hodges had thrown Kyrie against a wall in anger, causing fatal blunt force trauma. When she realized what she'd done, she tried to disguise the truth, calling Taylor and pretending it was a medical emergency. Her motive, prosecutors later said, was disturbingly simple: frustration and immaturity. The case quickly drew public attention across Detroit. For Taylor Starks, that betrayal was unbearable. She had no idea the woman she trusted was capable of violence. She told reporters through tears. He loved her. He'd smile every time he saw her. Hodges was charged with first-degree felony murder and first-degree child abuse, the most serious crimes under Michigan law, carrying a mandatory sentence of life without parole. For almost 3 years, she sat in Macomb County Jail, awaiting trial while prosecutors built their case. During the 2025 trial, jurors saw the medical photos, heard testimony from doctors, and watched Hodges' taped confession. The defense argued she hadn't intended to kill Kyrie, that it was an accident. But prosecutors pointed out the pattern, the lies, the delay in calling 911, the effort to mislead the mother. They said she didn't just snap, she tried to cover it up. Hodges was found guilty of first-degree felony murder and first-degree child abuse in the death of 23-month-old Kyrie Starks. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. During a post-verdict hearing, Taylor addressed Hodges directly. Her words were heartbreakingly calm. "I don't have hate in my heart for you," she said, "but I wish you had accountability. You took my son from me, and now you have to live with that." Prosecutors said the case highlighted how little oversight exists for informal childcare, people who advertise as babysitters without licenses or background checks. Parents should never have to second-guess leaving their child with someone they trust. Taylor Starks has turned her grief into activism, working with child safety organizations to promote background check awareness for babysitters and caregivers. "If I can save one child," she said, "then my son's life still means something." In January 2018, Sirens cut through a quiet Oklahoma City street. Inside a small house, paramedics carried out a 22-day-old baby, her tiny arms hanging motionless. 4 days earlier, the child's mother had left her in the care of a woman she found on Facebook, a woman who promised a Christian home and gentle hands. Her name was Holly Shepherd, 32 years old, calm, polite, and seemingly trustworthy. On her Facebook page, she posted verses about faith, photos of smiling children, and offers for low-cost babysitting. There was nothing to warn what was coming. At St. Anthony's Hospital, doctors realized the injuries weren't accidental. The infant's skull was fractured. Her brain was swelling rapidly. When detectives questioned Shepherd, her story shifted. First, the baby just went limp. Then she admitted, maybe I bumped her too hard. The medical examiner ruled the death suspicious, but without a confession or eyewitnesses, prosecutors didn't have enough evidence to charge her. The baby died. The file was marked undetermined. Shepherd walked free. For the next 5 years, she disappeared from public attention. She moved north to Kay County, opened a new home in Ponca City, and kept babysitting. Because Oklahoma didn't require licenses or background checks for private babysitters, she stayed off every registry. Anyone could advertise childcare on Facebook. No oversight, no inspection, no accountability. Then came another baby. In July 2023, a young mother named Mackenzie Allen found Shepherd's Facebook profile. She needed someone to watch her 3-month-old daughter while she worked. The baby's name was Cora. Mackenzie said Shepherd seemed kind, like someone who'd done this forever. She dropped Cora off on a Monday morning and headed to her shift at a local diner. 2 days later, her phone rang. When Mackenzie reached the house, paramedics were already there. Cora was pale, unresponsive, and badly bruised. At OU Children's Hospital, doctors diagnosed non-accidental abusive head trauma, the same type of injury that had killed the first infant 5 years earlier. Cora spent weeks in intensive care. Doctors weren't sure she would ever open her eyes again. Mackenzie Allen slept in a hospital chair for 23 nights, praying her daughter would move her fingers. When she finally did, nurses called it a miracle. Cora survived, but with partial vision loss and developmental delays. Every day I look at her scars, Mackenzie told local reporters, and I remember what trust almost cost us. The parallels between the two cases were undeniable. Both children were infants. Both families found Shepherd on Facebook, and both were in her care only a few days before suffering catastrophic injuries. Investigators compared the reports side by side. It was the same story, word for word, one detective said. When officers confronted Shepherd, she repeated the same explanation. Maybe I shook her too hard. This time, prosecutors had proof. In December 2024, Shepherd entered a blind plea of no contest to felony child abuse. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In court, Mackenzie Allen sat clutching Cora's tiny hospital bracelet. Shepherd stared at the floor as the judge read the sentence. There was no apology, no emotion. But that conviction reopened a closed file. Oklahoma City Police re-examined the 2018 death with new forensic experts. The autopsy told the same story: blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by another person. In April 2025, prosecutors charged Holly Shepherd with first-degree murder for the death of the 22-day-old infant. Parents across the state were horrified to learn that Shepherd had continued babysitting for years after that first baby's death. The case became a rallying point for reform. Child safety advocates demanded new laws to regulate informal childcare advertised on social media. Lawmakers began discussing a Shepherd Law, a proposal to make all online babysitting subject to the same licensing rules as professional daycare centers. Today, Holly Shepherd sits in an Oklahoma prison, serving life for child abuse while awaiting trial for murder. Mackenzie Allen continues to share updates about her daughter on Facebook through Cora's Journey, where thousands follow the little girl's progress. For investigators, the Shepherd case stands as both tragedy and warning, proof that childcare remains one of the least regulated corners of American life. and that trust without verification can be fatal. It began as a peaceful morning at a home daycare in Rutland County, Vermont, the kind of small-town setting parents dream of. Inside, babies napped in colorful cribs, while lullabies hummed softly from a phone speaker. On that morning in January 2019, one of those babies was 6-month-old Harper Rose Brier. Her parents had dropped her off like they always did, trusting that the woman running the daycare, Stacy Vilencourt, a licensed childcare provider, would keep her safe. By afternoon, that trust was gone forever. When emergency responders arrived, Harper was unresponsive. Stacy Vilencourt said the baby had gone down for a nap and never woke up. She claimed she'd found Harper motionless, face up in a portable crib, and called 911 immediately. But when police arrived, they noticed something unusual. On the kitchen counter sat an open bottle of Benadryl, the over-the-counter allergy medication whose active ingredient, diphenhydramine, can be deadly to infants. Within days, toxicology results confirmed what no parent wants to hear. Harper's death wasn't natural. The baby had toxic levels of diphenhydramine in her system, more than 10 times the amount a doctor would ever prescribe to a child. Investigators later determined that Valancourt had given the infant Benadryl to make her sleep longer, a practice she'd reportedly used before on fussy babies. Prosecutors described it as chemical restraint, a way for caregivers to sedate children instead of managing them. In interviews, Valancourt told police she didn't mean to hurt anyone. She said she only wanted to help the baby rest, but forensic evidence painted a darker picture, one of convenience over care, of a provider who valued quiet time more than the safety of the children she was paid to protect. As detectives gathered statements from former clients, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Other parents said they sometimes picked up their children and found them unusually drowsy or out of it. One mother remembered confronting Valancourt about it. The babysitter brushed it off, saying, "Some kids just sleep hard." For months, the case worked its way through Vermont's justice system. Prosecutors charged Valancourt with manslaughter and child cruelty, arguing that she had knowingly given a deadly drug to a 6-month-old baby. Her defense insisted it was a tragic mistake, that Valancourt didn't understand how dangerous Benadryl could be to an infant. But medical experts disagreed. They testified that even a single adult dose can stop a baby's heart. During trial in early 2024, the courtroom was filled with quiet disbelief as prosecutors replayed Valancourt's own police interviews. In them, she admitted that she'd been overwhelmed and that Harper just wouldn't settle. When asked if she'd used medication before, she hesitated and then said yes. The evidence was overwhelming. After days of testimony, the verdict came back: guilty of involuntary manslaughter and cruelty to child. A judge sentenced Stacy Valancourt to 3 to 10 years in prison. To the public, the sentence felt too light. Comment sections flooded with outrage. 3 years for killing a baby? The case reverberated far beyond Vermont. It forced parents and lawmakers to confront a chilling question: how many other caregivers quietly use medication to make children sleep? Pediatricians warned that over-the-counter drugs are sometimes misused in daycares to keep babies quiet, and that the practice is far more common than anyone wants to believe. For years, parents have been told to trust licensed home daycare providers, assuming that certification meant safety. But Harper's case exposed the cracks in that system. Licensing doesn't guarantee constant supervision, and inspections often occur only once or twice a year. Every parent watching this story can feel the weight of it. You can imagine dropping off your baby in the morning, never thinking it could be the last time you'd see them alive. Today, Stacy Valancourt remains in a Vermont correctional facility, serving her sentence for the death of 6-month-old Harper Rose Brier. She will be eligible for release in a few short years. Harper will never have that chance. In the heart of Red Bay, Alabama, a small in-home daycare called Tiny Tigers promised parents a safe, nurturing place. The Facebook page showed bright playmats, cartoon tigers, and smiling infants in onesies. It looked like a cozy corner of trust in a busy world. But on an August morning in 2022, that illusion shattered when a 4-month-old baby named Autumn Wells was found unresponsive in her crib. At first, it was treated as a tragic medical emergency, but what investigators would uncover over the next 3 years would expose lies, cover-ups, and turn the name Tiny Tigers Daycare into a symbol of betrayal across Alabama. The woman running the daycare that day was Peyton Gann, then 23 years old. She wasn't a trained childcare professional. She didn't have a state license. Yet, she had been taking care of multiple infants daily, often more than the legal limit, while their parents went to work. Autumn's parents had no idea. They believed the home was properly licensed. It even had the appearance of a legitimate daycare, complete with cribs, toys, and labeled cubbies. On the morning of August 19th, 2022, Autumn was dropped off like usual. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera later showed parents walking up the front steps, carrying their baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. A few hours later, an ambulance was outside that same door. When emergency responders arrived, Autumn wasn't breathing. They rushed her to Athens Limestone Hospital, but doctors could not revive her. Her cause of death was listed as positional asphyxia. Her airway had been blocked while she slept. What confused investigators was how it happened. At first, Peyton Gann told police that she had checked on the baby multiple times and noticed nothing wrong, but inconsistencies in her timeline raised suspicion. Officers noticed cameras inside the daycare had been turned off that day, and the story kept changing. Gann said she had placed the baby on her back, then later admitted she might have been laid on her side, propped by a blanket. Within weeks, a deeper investigation revealed the daycare was operating illegally. Tiny Tigers had never been licensed, despite caring for several children daily, a direct violation of Alabama law. State inspectors had previously issued warnings to the owner, Angeline Chambly, who had hired Peyton Gann to assist her. When authorities dug through records, they found multiple prior complaints from parents about unsafe sleeping conditions and overcrowding. But the soldiers had no setup in the centers of the states. The Athens Police Department reopened the case in 2023 after new evidence came forward, including texts between Gann and the daycare owner, suggesting they had agreed to mislead investigators about what happened that morning. One message, according to court testimony, read, "We need to say we checked every 10 minutes." By early 2025, prosecutors presented a full case before a Limestone County jury. The charges were severe: manslaughter and false reporting. The prosecution argued that Gann had placed Autumn in a dangerous sleeping position, left her unattended, and then lied to cover it up. They said her actions weren't an accident, they were gross negligence. In court, Autumn's parents sat together in silence as prosecutors replayed the 911 call and read the daycare's messages. The defense argued Gann was inexperienced, overwhelmed, and devastated by what happened. But that argument faltered when investigators testified that Gann had deleted photos, turned off the camera system, and helped the owner hide the unlicensed status of the daycare before police arrived. After 4 days of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on both counts. In May 2025, Peyton Gann was sentenced to 20 years in prison, split to serve 6 years behind bars, with the remainder on probation. The judge told her, "You were responsible for another person's child. You failed her, and you lied to protect yourself." The owner, Angeline Chambly, faced her own legal troubles. She was later indicted for criminally negligent homicide and operating an unlicensed daycare. Alabama law requires home daycares caring for more than 6 children to be licensed and inspected, yet hundreds still operate without oversight. Tiny Tigers Daycare had slipped through those cracks, with no one checking the ratio of infants to caregivers or the unsafe sleeping setups being used. Had the baby been laid flat on her back in an empty crib, no pillows, no blankets, she likely would have survived. But that morning, convenience overruled caution. In interviews after the sentencing, her mother said, "I don't want another parent to go through what we did. Check the license. Check the records. Don't assume a smiling Facebook page means safety. Las Vegas is known for bright lights and endless distractions, a city where everything moves fast and people are often too busy to notice what's happening behind closed doors. But on one scorching summer afternoon in 2021, what happened inside a small apartment in the northwest part of the city would leave even hardened detectives shaken. It wasn't a story about gambling or greed or organized crime. It was about a 5-year-old boy named Ryan Peralta and the woman who was supposed to protect him. That woman was Courtney, a 22-year-old babysitter and former daycare employee. She had been hired by Ryan's father to watch his son while he worked long hours. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She appeared kind, responsible, and patient. She had references, experience, and a soft voice that put parents at ease. But beneath that calm exterior was a different side, one that neighbors would later describe as angry and short-tempered, especially around children. On March 11, 2021, Las Vegas police received a frantic 911 call from Courtney herself. She told dispatchers that Ryan wasn't breathing. Paramedics rushed to the scene and found the little boy lying on the floor with severe injuries to his head and body. His condition was critical. He was rushed to University Medical Center, but despite doctors' efforts, Ryan was pronounced dead later that night. At first, Courtney claimed it had been an accident, that Ryan had fallen in the bathtub and hit his head. But the truth unraveled almost immediately. Detectives found inconsistencies between her story and the physical evidence. There was no water in the tub, no signs of a fall. Surveillance footage from a security camera outside the apartment complex showed her pacing nervously in the minutes before calling 911. Afterward, she FaceTimed her boyfriend and stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru on her way home. A chillingly casual detour. Inside the apartment, investigators found signs of a struggle. Furniture was overturned. Bloodstains were visible on the wall near the living room, and one of Ryan's toys, a small action figure, was broken in half. The coroner's report was grim. As detectives pressed her for answers, Courtney's story fell apart. During questioning, she admitted she might have gotten frustrated because Ryan wouldn't stop crying. She later told police that she blacked out and couldn't remember exactly what she did, but prosecutors argued she remembered plenty. She just didn't want to face the truth. The case drew attention across Nevada, not just for its brutality, but because of the cold detachment Courtney displayed after her arrest. Detectives described her demeanor as flat and emotionless. When told Ryan hadn't survived, she simply said, "Okay." Within days, she was charged with first-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. The case moved swiftly. Ryan's parents sat in the courtroom during every hearing. His father, who had trusted Courtney completely, was visibly broken. He told reporters that he had hired her because she seemed kind and gentle, and that she had watched Ryan several times before with no issues. He had even recommended her to another family. The guilt, he said, was unbearable. Prosecutors said Ryan had been punched and beaten repeatedly. They called it a prolonged assault. Courtney's defense argued that she suffered from severe mental health issues and hadn't intended to kill the boy. They claimed she was overwhelmed and had a psychotic break, but the jury was unconvinced. The evidence was too strong, the timeline too clear. In July 2022, Courtney was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. When the verdict was read, she showed no visible emotion. Courtney remains incarcerated at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. She will be eligible for parole in her 40s, but for Ryan's family, that possibility feels hollow. She gets another chance, his father said. My son doesn't. It was supposed to be just another quiet night in paradise. On the island of Oahu, palm trees swayed in the evening wind as a young mother kissed her 7-month-old daughter goodbye and handed her to the babysitter. The woman's name was Dixie Denise Villa, a 47-year-old caregiver. who promised she'd watched dozens of children before. The home, in the small town of Wahiawa, looked peaceful. There were toys in the living room, a playpen near the window, and the faint scent of baby lotion in the air. It was supposed to be safe. By sunrise, baby Abigail Lobish was gone. In the early hours of May 24, 2019, emergency responders were called to Villa's home after she reported that Abigail wasn't breathing. Paramedics rushed in to find the infant unresponsive with no pulse. She was rushed to Wahiawa General Hospital, where doctors tried for nearly 30 minutes to revive her, but it was too late. Abigail was pronounced dead before dawn. Villa told police she had put the baby to sleep and found her unresponsive a few hours later. She said Abigail had been fussy and wouldn't settle, but insisted she hadn't done anything wrong. To investigators, her story sounded familiar, the kind of vague explanation they heard too often when a child died under suspicious circumstances. Then, the autopsy results came back. Toxicology testing revealed diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, in Abigail's system. The dose was massive, far beyond what a baby could safely metabolize. The findings stunned even veteran detectives. Diphenhydramine, an antihistamine meant for adults, can slow breathing and stop a baby's heart when given in even small amounts. When investigators confronted Villa, she eventually admitted that she had given Abigail Benadryl to help her sleep. In her statement, she said she had several children in the house that night and felt overwhelmed. Rather than calling for help or asking another adult to assist, she chose the easiest route, medicating a baby into silence. It was a decision that turned deadly. Abigail's parents were heartbroken and furious. They had known Villa for years. She was a friend of a friend, someone who had offered to watch their daughter overnight so they could celebrate an anniversary. They had even paid her extra for the favor. They never imagined that decision would cost them their child. Within weeks, Villa was arrested and charged with manslaughter and reckless endangering. Prosecutors said she had played doctor, using medication to control infants rather than care for them. For years, the case wound through Hawaii's court system, delayed by appeals, COVID-19 disruptions, and Villa's repeated requests for reduced charges. But in 2024, the case finally went to trial, and what emerged was even darker than anyone expected. Prosecutors revealed that Villa had been babysitting multiple children overnight that evening, far more than allowed by state law. She had taken in 5 kids, ranging from infants to toddlers, in her small apartment. They also presented text messages and social media posts where Villa had joked about using Benadryl before, calling it magic sleep dust. Those messages horrified jurors. In court, medical experts explained in clinical detail what the drug had done to Abigail's body, how her heart slowed, how her oxygen levels dropped. It wasn't instant, they said. It took time. The defense argued that Villa hadn't known the risks. They claimed she was exhausted, underpaid, and dealing with stress, not malice. But prosecutors counted that ignorance was no excuse. Every parent knows you don't give drugs to make a baby sleep. She knew it was wrong. She did it anyway. In October 2024, the verdict came back, guilty of manslaughter. The judge later imposed the maximum sentence, 20 years in prison, calling Villa's conduct a conscious act of selfishness, not an accident. Outside the courthouse, the family addressed reporters. Abigail's father said, "We trusted her with our baby because she said she loved children. I'll never make that mistake again." The story of Dixie Denise Villa spread far beyond Hawaii. Pediatricians weighed in, explaining that over-the-counter medications like Benadryl are among the most common causes of accidental infant deaths when misused. Some admitted that in the childcare world, using medication to make babies sleep was a quiet, unspoken practice, one that Villa's conviction had finally dragged into the light. Hawaii lawmakers cited the case when proposing new regulations for overnight childcare. Under the reforms, unlicensed babysitters could face felony charges for administering any kind of medication without a doctor's approval. It was a small step, but one driven by a tragedy that had shaken parents everywhere. For Abigail's family, no punishment could ever be enough. they still keep her nursery exactly as it was. "We used to complain about her crying," her mother said. "Now, I'd give anything to hear it again." Today, Villa sits in a Hawaii state prison, serving her 20-year sentence. She'll be eligible for parole in the early 2040s. By then, Abigail would have been old enough to start college, a future she never got to live.
You did that, man. See that? There's gonna be a lot of stuff you're scared of, but it don't matter. You gotta push through it.
In the summer of 2024, 6-year-old Chance Crawford had just started first grade in Placentia, California. He was bright, curious, and loved to draw Mickey Mouse. His mother worked nights as a nurse, so when her schedule got hard to manage, a friend stepped in, a man she thought she could trust. Ernest Lamar Love was more than a barber. He was part of the neighborhood fabric. To everyone who knew him, Love wasn't just cutting hair. He was the uncle who handed out free fades before picture day, who told kids to stay in school and out of trouble. When he offered to babysit Chance after school, it seemed harmless, even kind. On August 29th, 2024, she expected a routine night. By the end of that week, her son would never wake up again. Love grew angry after the boy wet his pants at a park. Instead of comforting him, he decided to punish him. Investigators later said he used a piece of raw lumber, beating the child again and again, then forcing him to do push-ups and jumping jacks. Hours passed before Love finally drove Chance to the emergency room. Doctors at Children's Hospital of Orange County said the 6-year-old arrived unresponsive. One physician said, "No fall could do this. Someone did." When police questioned Love, he told shifting stories. That Chance had slipped in the bathroom, that he'd fallen, that maybe he'd hit his head on furniture. Officers noticed something chilling. When they told him the boy was critical, he didn't ask if Chance was alive. He just said, "Am I going to jail?" Not once did he ask about the child's condition. 3 days later, Chance died from his injuries. The coroner ruled it homicide. For his mother, it was unbearable. "He came into my son's life as a male figure," she said. "I trusted him with my son. He was supposed to protect him." In September 2024, the Orange County District Attorney charged Ernest Lamar Love with murder, torture, and child abuse causing death. He pleaded not guilty and remains held without bail. If convicted, he faces up to life in prison. Prosecutors called it one of the most brutal child abuse cases this county has ever seen. Evidence collected from Love's barbershop and car told the story in grim detail. Investigators found traces of blood on the concrete floor and cleaning chemicals nearby. Surveillance footage showed Love carrying a wooden plank into the shop that evening, the same object police say became a weapon. When the story hit the news, the community erupted in grief and disbelief. Parents who had once taken their children to Love's barbershop said they felt betrayed. His chair sat empty as candles and flowers filled the sidewalk outside. The district attorney said the case revealed a blind spot in everyday childcare, the informal favors that fall outside licensing laws. Across America, millions of parents rely on friends or neighbors for supervision. Most are safe, but when abuse happens, there's no paper trail, no oversight, no way to prevent it from happening again. Today, Ernest Lamar Love sits in an Orange County jail cell, awaiting trial. For prosecutors, it's about justice. For Chance's family, it's about closure that will never fully come. Chance Crawford wanted to make people laugh. Now his story makes them listen. In McKinney, Texas, in the fall of 2005, the Lazaric family lived a life built around small joys, bedtime stories, family dinners, and the laughter of 3 children. The youngest, 14-month-old Kyle Lazaric, was just learning to walk. He had a twin brother and an older sister, and he'd started babbling new words, mispronouncing them in the way that makes parents smile. Inside that house, helping the family keep their balance, was a woman named Ada Betty Quadros Fernandez. She was 38 years old, originally from Peru, and had come to Texas years earlier to work as a nanny. By all accounts, she blended into the rhythm of the home. The Lazarics trusted her completely. She lived with them, helped feed the twins, folded laundry, and was treated almost like family. Friends remembered her as quiet, polite, sometimes stern, but never alarming. It was October 12, 2005. Kyle's parents left for work as usual. The children were home with Cuadros Fernandez. Then, sometime before noon, a loud crash echoed through the house. When the parents returned, they found paramedics already inside. Kyle was unconscious, his body limp, his skin pale. His twin brother was crying in the corner. Doctors at the medical center of McKinney worked frantically to revive him. Their scans told a story that words couldn't soften. One surgeon compared the force to a fall from multiple stories. There was no sign of such a fall in the home. The explanation didn't fit. When detectives questioned Ada Betty Cuadros Fernandez, her story changed again and again. First, she said Kyle slipped on the kitchen floor. Then she said he fell off the counter. Later, she said she might have bumped his head on the door. Investigators noted the inconsistencies and the coldness in her tone. Evidence inside the house deepened suspicion. A cabinet door was cracked. There was tissue residue on its edge. Police believed she had slammed it, possibly with the child between the door and the frame, in a burst of anger or frustration. Cuadros Fernandez was arrested and charged with capital murder. Her mugshot, emotionless and detached, ran across local newscasts. The trial began in 2007 and stretched into weeks of testimony. Jurors listened as medical experts described the internal damage in clinical terms. The evidence suggested it wasn't the first time she had hurt him. Prosecutors told the jury their theory. The nanny, frustrated by the toddler's crying, lost her temper. Her defense argued it was an accident, that she panicked, that she never meant harm. But the photographs of Kyle's injuries left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. They found her guilty of capital murder. The sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Lazaric family, that verdict should have brought peace, but it didn't last. In 2009, an appeals court overturned the conviction, ruling that errors during jury selection had violated her right to a fair trial. The family was devastated. The woman convicted of killing their son would face a new jury, and the thought of reliving the testimony felt unbearable. 7 years after Kyle's death, in 2012, the second trial began. Much of the evidence was the same: the autopsy photos, the blood analysis, the interviews. But this time, the jury took longer. They examined every inconsistency, every second of the nanny's testimony. When the verdict came down, it was the same as before: guilty of capital murder. The sentence, life without parole. In court, Kyle's mother looked at the women who had once lived in her home and said, "What does a mother say to someone who murders her baby? You will never know what you've done to us." Cuadros Fernandez didn't respond. The Lazarics moved from their home not long after. Kyle's twin brother grew up quiet for a time, the shadow of loss following him through school. In interviews, family friends said the case changed the way they thought about childcare entirely. Background checks became mandatory in their community, not optional. Parents began installing cameras, using nanny registries, and demanding verification for anyone who worked in their homes. Today, Ada Betty Cuadros Fernandez remains incarcerated at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, serving life without parole. She maintains her innocence, claiming Kyle's death was a terrible accident. The Lazaric family has stopped responding to her letters. Manchester, England, a June morning in 2022. A nursery called Tiny Toes was opening its doors for the day, sunlight cutting across a classroom filled with toys and pastel colors. Parents arrived with toddlers in their arms, trusting that this place was safe. Among them was a mother named Claire Mihan, holding her 9-month-old daughter, Genevie Mihan. Evie was healthy, bright, and endlessly curious. She reached for every color and sound, loved music, and smiled with her whole face. That morning, Claire kissed her forehead, said goodbye, and handed her to Kate Roughley, the nursery's deputy manager, an experienced childcare worker with 17 years on the job. By the end of that day, Evie would be gone. Security footage from inside the nursery would later show minute by minute, what happened. At 1:35 p.m., Roughley placed Evie face down on a beanbag for her nap. It wasn't unusual for children to nap during the day, but what followed was nothing short of catastrophic. Instead of laying her in a cot or crib, Roughley positioned her chest down on the beanbag, pulled a blanket tightly over her body and head, and walked away. For the next 90 minutes, the baby lay there, struggling to breathe. The room was quiet, except for a white noise machine and faint laughter from another classroom. The CCTV recorded every moment. When Roughley finally returned, she found the baby unresponsive. At first, she thought Evie was just in a deep sleep. Then, panic set in. Staff members called emergency services and tried CPR. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Evie was pronounced dead that afternoon. At first, police treated it as a tragic accident, but the CCTV told a different story. Investigators found evidence of neglect, not only that day, but in Roughley's general behavior. Witnesses described her as strict and impatient with crying infants. The autopsy confirmed the cause: positional asphyxia. Evie had suffocated because she was left face down, her nose and mouth pressed into the beanbag. Prosecutors charged Kate Roughley with manslaughter by gross negligence, arguing that her actions showed a complete disregard for basic safety standards. Her experience, they said, made the negligence worse, not accidental, but arrogant. The trial began in 2024 at Manchester Crown Court. The courtroom was packed with parents, journalists, and childcare experts who had come to witness what the prosecution called a failure of duty, not a moment of mistake. When the CCTV was played, the room fell silent. For 90 minutes, the footage showed Roughley occasionally glancing into the nap room, but never once lifting the blanket or checking Evie's breathing. Evie's mother sat through every second. During sentencing, she read a letter addressed to her daughter. "You were our everything, the light in our lives. We trusted her to protect you. Instead, she stole you from us." The defense argued that Roughley was overworked, that the nursery was understaffed, and that she hadn't intended harm. But the judge dismissed it all. This wasn't about exhaustion, it was about disregard. A conscious choice to ignore a crying baby and to abandon basic care. In May 2024, the jury found Kate Roughley guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence. Her sentence, 14 years in prison. The judge's words were direct. "You treated that baby as an inconvenience, not as a life." The case sent shockwaves through the UK childcare community. Parents demanded stronger supervision rules and better training standards. Legislators cited the Roughley case in proposals to improve nursery inspections and enforce lower staff-to-infant ratios. For the Mihan family, reform couldn't fill the silence left behind. They created a foundation in her name, one that donates safe sleep equipment and baby monitors to struggling families. The footage remains sealed to the public, but investigators describe it as a minute-by-minute record of what happens when care turns into neglect. The nursery where Evie died, Tiny Toes, shut down permanently. Its windows were boarded up, the bright sign taken down. Today, Kate Roughley serves her sentence in a women's prison in England. She will be eligible for release after half her term, though petitions opposing early parole continue to gain support. Her story isn't about rage or cruelty. It's about what happens when responsibility becomes routine, when compassion fades into habit.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
Springville, New York, March 2013. A teenage boy sits on a couch, headset around his neck, video game controller in hand. In the next room, a toddler cries. That boy was Dylan Schumaker, 17 years old. He'd been dating a young mother, Ashley Smith, and when she needed someone to watch her 2-year-old son, Austin Smith, he agreed. He'd babysat before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Austin was 23 months old, barely speaking, still in diapers. His mother left for her restaurant shift that evening, trusting Dylan to handle dinner, bath time, and bedtime. By 9 p.m., the trust was gone. When first responders arrived, they found Austin lying on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. His face was swollen. Bruises covered his body. Dylan told officers the child had fallen while playing. The truth was far worse. Dylan lost his temper because the toddler wouldn't stop crying while he was trying to play a video game. In anger, he struck Austin's head against a pillow and threw him onto a bed. The blows caused severe brain trauma. When detectives confronted him, Dylan said, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I was just frustrated." He repeated that sentence again and again. Paramedics rushed Austin to Women and Children's Hospital in Buffalo. Doctors found severe brain swelling and retinal hemorrhaging, consistent with shaken impact syndrome. He was placed on life support. 2 days later, his mother, Ashley Smith, stood beside his hospital bed and whispered goodbye before doctors disconnected the machines. Austin Smith was 23 months old. The next morning, Dylan Schumaker was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. His mugshot showed a teenager, blonde, frightened, barely an adult. That image divided the country. Could someone so young truly understand what he'd done? But then came the phone call. While awaiting trial in the Erie County Holding Center, Schumaker made a recorded call to his mother. In it, he said, "I'm a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me." When prosecutors obtained that recording, everything changed. At trial, they used that quote to expose what they called calculated self-pity. To them, Dylan's tears weren't remorse, they were performance. When Dylan took the stand, he cried throughout his testimony, insisting he never meant to kill Austin. The prosecutor reminded him of his own words from the jail call. "You said you'd cry in front of the jury. Are you crying now because of Austin or because you got caught?" The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. The verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Then Judge Boller looked at him and said, "You were bigger, stronger, and older. You were supposed to protect him, not beat him to death. You murdered a helpless child because he cried." With that, the court sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. The footage became one of the most replayed courtroom clips of the decade. It fueled nationwide debate about remorse, youth, and accountability. But the story didn't end there. In 2016, Schumaker's defense appealed the sentence, arguing that the judge hadn't properly weighed his age and lack of criminal history. The appellate court agreed. The sentence was reduced to 18 years to life, meaning Dylan could seek parole as early as 2031. For Austin's family, that decision reopened every wound. His mother said, "He gets a second chance at life. My son doesn't." Public reaction was swift and divided. Some saw a teenager whose brain wasn't fully developed, impulsive, immature, capable of change. Others saw a manipulator who understood exactly how to place sympathy. Inside prison, Dylan reportedly earned his GED and completed anger management programs. He remains incarcerated at a New York State correctional facility, now 29 years old. A toddler with blonde curls, a red t-shirt, and a love for toy trucks. His mother still keeps that shirt in a glass frame above her bed. From the babysitters who promised love to the ones who delivered death, these 10 stories reveal the darkest side of trust. They were the caretakers every parent hopes to find. Gentle, dependable, familiar. Yet behind closed doors, they became something else entirely. Each case is a reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the night. Sometimes, it's the smiling face you hand your child to in the morning, the person you believe will keep them safe. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime documentaries. And tell us in the comments which case shocked you the most.